And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Preston Dennett, who began investigating UFOs and the paranormal in 1986 when he discovered that his family, friends, and coworkers were having dramatic, unexplained encounters. Since then, he has been interviewed and has interviewed hundreds of witnesses and investigated a wide variety of paranormal phenomena. He's also a field investigator for MUFON, a ghost hunter, a paranormal researcher, and the author of more than 30 books and 100 articles about the UFOs and the paranormal. Preston, welcome back. It's great to have you again.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Preston, would it be correct to say that you have written more books about UFOs than anyone else on the planet?
I'm in the running.
Yeah.
There's some other people out there who are quite prolific. Brad Steiger, I know, has a ton of books. Nick Redfern, he writes quite a bit. There's some other people who write smaller UFO pamphlets, which I guess you could call it a book, but yeah, I'm up there.
I would consider you a cornerstone of the UFO community because you've been writing and been in the scene for so long.
Yeah, I'm pretty passionate about it. I have a lot of fun with this. I'm very lucky because I was young when I found out this was a real thing, 21 years old. So that gave me a little bit of a head start. And I got involved in the late 1980s, which is when this subject really started to take off with, Whitley Strieber's book Communion, Bud Hopkins' book Intruders, Gary Kinder's book Light Years. We really kind of popularized this subject. So I caught the wave, and I've been writing it ever since.
Good for you. Well, I want to congratulate you because I saw Ross Coltart's interview and where he spoke about your book, Schoolyard UFO Encounters.
Yeah, how amazing is that? I had quite a few people telling me, I'm like, wow, because this was like a mainstream show. And he mentioned it briefly, but he used the word great.
Yeah, yeah, good for you.
Like, whoa. And, it was mentioned on the Joe Rogan show not too long ago. And yeah, so this is really cool to me because this particular subject, Schoolyard UFO Encounters, is, I think, really important. I think it's got something to say about extraterrestrial contact. And it's just close to my heart because it involves children who we all love. And I think are a really important part of the world, obviously. But yeah, it's a subject that kind of slipped under most people's radar.
Why do you think the UFOs or basically the ETs are visiting schoolyards?
Oh, well, that's the million-dollar question, but I think I've got a good idea why. Because it's pretty clear to me over the years that ET contact, one of their goals, agendas, is to conduct a publicity campaign, sort of announce their presence, but in a way that's not disruptive. Say they were to just hover over LA or New York or wherever, Paris, and not go away. Well, of course, this would cause huge upset in multiple areas of society, whether it's religion or business or politics or what have you. Yet they are, intentionally showing themselves. It's clear that this is happening because UFO researchers call this a display. Normally, they're pretty evasive in a way, but are showing themselves to small groups of people, singly, small groups or occasional waves of sightings over usually a small town. But then there's this one category, schoolyard encounters, which is almost unique. There's some parallels because I did a whole book on drive-in movie theater encounters, which is very similar to this. And there are various sporting events where UFOs have come down or concerts. But it's not like this. They're coming. I got over 100 cases in the one book that I put out, and now it's probably twice that I found, because every time you put out a book, people start coming in at you with additional accounts. So I think that's what's going on here. It is a very clever method to introduce the idea of the ET presence on our planet in a very under the radar way. Because, children seen and not heard, kind of that attitude adults have. And yet children quickly become adults, and they have a huge influence naturally on society. And without exception, these children are, of course, growing up, and not one of them has retracted their account. There's no evidence any of this being hoaxed or anything like that. In a number of these cases, these children do grow up to be pretty influential. Malcolm Robinson is a good example. He had a schoolyard encounter at a primary school in Scotland. He's now one of Scotland's leading UFO researchers. He's written UFOs over Scotland 1 and 2 and several other books. And there are others who become astrophysicists or scientists or teachers. It has a big impact on these children. I mean, to the point where some of them have reunions to sort of memorialize that encounter that occurred to them when they were just tiny little kids.
Is it still happening?
Not to the degree that it was. You know, I put this book out a few years ago, and I found many recent cases. But the real heyday was the 60s, 70s, and 80s for UFOs in general. There has been a drop-off very recently of UFO encounters. But yeah, it was still going on. It's been going on. I found a case from the 1850, actually, but really it started in 1950, and every year there's 2 or 3 high-quality cases. You know what I liken it to? Like a book tour or a concert tour. The ETs are going from place to place to place in a very, it's kind of random, but it's kind of not. Because that's how it looks to me. It's like, well, let's hit this goal, hit this goal, hit this one. And I found some really interesting patterns in that regard.
Have you ever taken a globe and just put pins in the globe where all the encounters were and the times and see if there's like a flight path or something?
Yeah, not a globe, but, a map. And, I did little dots. And it's fairly spread out and random, but it's all over the world. Russia, China, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, all across South America, across the United States, of course, Canada, England, across Europe. It's everywhere. So it's absolutely ubiquitous worldwide. And I think we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg because, as you know, most people don't report. These cases are not being published in UFO books, really at all. I found only a few. And it really kind of came to my attention not long after the Rua, Zimbabwe case at Ariel Elementary School started getting some real publicity. I thought, well, that's certainly an interesting case. This was, of course, September of 1994, but wasn't publicized for some years. But it instantly caught my attention because I thought, well, there's that case in Broadhaven, Wales, 1977, where a UFO landed next to the school. ETs got out. I think a group of about 10 children saw it. They didn't think any teacher saw it. Of course, 2 or 3 came out and said, well, yeah, we did see this. I thought, gosh, there's also that case in Australia. It took me a second to think about it, but I'm like, that's it, Westall High School. And I'm like, okay, that's 1966, April. Let me see. Yeah, April. And that, of course, some 300 kids, maybe 400, and teachers saw 3 UFOs, at least one of which landed next to the school and left landing traces. I mean, this is a very, very well verified case. It's Australia's most widely viewed UFO encounter, probably most famous as well.
How do the children usually react to the UFOs and the ETs? Do they panic and run and scream, or do they accept it?
Oh, there are cases of them absolutely panicking, but generally they're very excited about it. They run towards it. There's not a whole lot of fear involved in most of these cases. Some, yes, obviously, but here's what's so interesting is over half of these, quote, schoolyard encounters are at primary schools, elementary schools, our youngest kids. And these are kids who, generally speaking, have never heard of UFOs. And kids, they're not really afraid of somebody who perhaps looks a little different. They have no prejudices. They don't have that overlay of, interpreting an experience as angelic or demonic or what have you. To them, it's just an experience because the whole world is new. So generally, no, they don't have fear. They can be very excited about it. But yeah, I thought that was a really interesting pattern because they are visiting, junior high schools, even colleges. But it's mostly elementary schools. And that was another thing that kind of clicked on me, like, get them while they're young, so to speak, that phrase. Because young kids are they're sponges. They learn so quickly. And there's, of course, controversy how good of an observer or a witness is a child. And I think they're great witnesses for a couple of reasons. One, again, they don't interpret the experience, they just report the facts. Second, you can tell when they're lying pretty easy. If you're an adult, if you're their parent, you know when your kid is lying. And also, they're sponges. They are great observers in terms of how much information they can absorb. And mind you, over half the cases do involve teachers who are very well educated, more than the average person, obviously. And what's different about these cases is these are very widely viewed. 20, 30 kids would be on the low end, usually closer to 50 or 100, or in some cases, several hundred. So there's some really interesting aspects to schoolyard encounters. And if I may, just real quickly, these are mostly daytime encounters. That's pretty rare. Most encounters are nighttime. Also, these are fairly long lasting. 5 minutes would be on the short end. Most UFO encounters are, zip, 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 and off it goes. Some of these occur for, not 15 minutes, an hour, or even over a period of days. Also, they're very low level encounters. So these are, the typical encounters, an anomalous light way the heck up there. These come down to a couple of 100 feet, usually, and they'll do a display. They'll show off a little bit, perhaps release smaller craft, flash their lights, move around some way. And finally, this is so interesting, Jeff. 1/3 of these cases involve landings and/or humanoids. UFO landings are pretty darn rare compared to sightings. So this category has some really unique and unusual elements to it. And that's a lot.
What is your definition of humanoid? Because would a gray be considered humanoid, or what they call a Nordic, or even a reptilian, which is a human, 2 arms and 2 legs, but with a reptile head? How do you define that?
Yeah, we're humanoids. All humans are humanoids. So yeah, I would define it as someone who has an two arms, 2 legs, bipedal, a head, of humanoid form, but not necessarily human as we would think of it. But yeah, grays. I don't like the term Nordic because it's misleading, because they do come in, darker skin complexions. But yeah, Nordic, human looking. Really humanoids of all kinds. Some are quite tall, some are quite short. There's hairy little humanoids, there's tall whites, there's little blue beings. So you have your normal bell curve, the same we see with, onboard experiences, say. So you have quite a wide variety, quite a few grays. Grays do dominate the whole UFO field. Human looking, I'd say, would come second. But yeah, there's almost universally humanoid. They're relatively rare compared to the majority of cases, but there are a lot of landings. So that is significant.
Do you think that a percentage of these encounters could be our own ships?
Yes, I think there are some. Don't think it's a lot. There was one in, Iron Mountain. Where was it? It's somewhere up the northeast, Minnesota or something, where a craft came over and it had rivets on it. And when you see something like that, that's a dead giveaway that this is probably one of ours. But generally speaking, no, I don't think most of these would be reverse engineered or secret military craft, because students describe them as being seamless, bright, shiny, silver, saucer-shaped is most common, but, cigar-shaped, egg-shaped, boomerang, all the different shapes make an appearance at some point. but I'd say the vast majority of these are genuine ET. It's really not military policy to fly over a schoolyard with a secret military craft. We can't rule it out, obviously. I think as time goes on, the number of, quote, military secret craft, the chances go up that what their people are seeing would fall into that category. But the
Well,
earlier the encounter, in the 50s, I don't know that we really had a lot of this stuff going on.
have any of the children or their teachers been abducted?
Yes, this does happen. It's not super common, but look at the Rua, Zimbabwe case, which is the most famous schoolyard case, and real brief because this is well known. That was in 1994, November, and the two or three UFOs showed up. One landed, three ETs got out, one walked right up to the schoolyard. At least 200 kids were on the schoolyard. At least 60 saw this. A smaller handful saw the humanoid, and a very few, 5 or 10, received some telepathic communication. One of them was Emily Trim. God bless her, she recently passed on. But she started having onboard encounters following this. There was another case investigated by Leonard Stringfield. Great researcher. I really like his stuff. He interviewed a student who actually contacted him because he tried to tell his parents, and his parents were skeptical and didn't believe him when he said he saw a UFO over the playground, and then later it followed him home. And he had a visitation in his bedroom where the ET came in and said, you know what they always say, don't be afraid, have no fear, you need to come with us. And he ended up draining one of their bank accounts of like $500, wrote a note saying, I'm running away, the ETs are after me. And they had to call the police. They found him at, I think it was Atlanta airport, or
Wow.
I think it was in Georgia, actually. And they had to take him seriously at this point. There are a few cases of this, but generally speaking, no, it just appears to be what we would call a simple sighting, a close encounter of the first kind, perhaps second, because there are cases involving landing traces or physiological effects or things like this, where it affects the environment in some way, a close encounter of the second kind. But generally speaking, no, they're simple sightings.
How do the kids usually talk about the experience? Do they usually, first of all, do they corroborate with each other and so
Oh, yeah.
on?
Oh, yeah. Generally speaking, they do. It causes a complete uproar among the kids. There was one case I personally investigated at Point Elementary School in St. Louis, Missouri. I talked to one of the witnesses, Melody Korn is her name, and she and I think it was 5 other friends decided they weren't going to play Foursquare in the front of the school like everyone else, and they were going to play tag at the far end of the school. And got there and were just about to start when they found footprints, strange little humanoid footprints. And they're looking at them thinking, what could cause this? Because they were tiny little footprints, but clearly, 2 feet. And so they're looking, following them, and they look up and they see lights in the trees just beyond the boundary of the school. And they're little kids. This is, again, an elementary school. So their first thought was, ice cream truck. And they are not supposed to leave the school bounds, but they did. They ran in towards this, these lights in the trees, and came upon a craft, typical flying saucer, and standing right in front of it was a being which was unique in terms of its description. It wasn't a gray, it wasn't human looking. She said it was very muscular, had a uniform on. Its face was closest to a gorilla, is how she described it. And they walked right up to this thing. They were about 10, 20 feet away from it. And they lined up in a row, and it saw them, stared at them, and slowly backed up towards the craft and was about to enter it when their teacher, Mrs. Ohlendorf, wish I could find her, screamed from behind them. She saw it too, and pulled them back onto the school and ordered them to go back in. By this point, other kids are starting to rush forward, and they see this craft too. So she ushers them all into the classroom, and they, of course, rush to the windows because they want to see it. And she's shutting all the blinds. She's calling the principal and other teachers. It's chaos. It shut the school down early that day. They put them all in the gymnasium and started sending them home. One of the kids like, there it goes, watched it take off. But this was the subject for months. Kids were a buzz talking about it. The teachers were furious or forbade them from talking about it. Of course, that didn't help. Generally speaking, this is something that causes a buzz for months, even years afterwards. They still talk about it as adults. It really has a huge, profound influence on them. There's another case, if I may, in Maranui, New Zealand. I love this case. Primary school, 400 kids on the playground. There's two teachers on the playground watching them. And suddenly the teacher's like, no kids are talking. All the noise of the playing has stopped. And he's looking around at them, and they're all looking up. And a kid comes running up to him and says, teacher, I forget his name. What's that? Of course, he looks up, and it's this massive disc, and totally silent, and hovers there for about 10, 15 minutes. And he's like, Mister, is that a UFO? And he's like, yes, I guess it is. Finally, it turns up on its side. This is a marker of, a genuine craft. This is often how they'll maneuver. It'll turn up on their side, and it darts off, totally silent. 400 kids saw this, and it completely stopped their play. So people react in different ways. There was a very early case in Prestonsburg, Kentucky, first one I could find in the modern age of, ufology, 1947 onwards. This was 1950, and the kids panicked in this one. They absolutely scattered. A few threw up. They were absolutely alarmed, ran into the school, called out the teacher. The craft had gone, but recess began again, and now, this was recess. Then lunch came. These two craft came back. This is how this is intentional. This is not just kids out at recess and a UFO flies by. These craft are targeting schools. And it came down, swooped so low they could see the humanoids inside of it. And the teacher granted an interview, but again, caused complete panic among the kids. So they react in different ways.
How do you find all these cases?
Oh, when I first started searching for this, I'm like, there was 5 or 10 really famous cases, because I started wondering, like, is this a thing? I found the Broadhaven case, the Melbourne, Australia case, and the Rua, Zimbabwe case. I thought, gosh, I know there's one in Florida. I had to look it up, Opelika, Florida. And this is that weird pattern again. 1 year to the day after the Melbourne Westall High School case, there was one at Crestview Elementary School in Opelika, Florida. And 2 weeks before the Melbourne case, there was the Hillsdale College incident in Michigan, super famous. 80 students, school faculty, police officers saw it. Not a lot of people know, but this lasted for 2 hours, and the craft actually landed in front of the school. So those were easy to find. Those are in a lot of the UFO journals. But I'm wondering, gosh, I know there's more out there. And I couldn't find them in books. That's where I first looked. And I started to hit pay dirt when I went to the UFO news clipping service. There's several of these. I subscribed to MUFON's. It's the most famous one. And started going through it. And I'm like, oh, I hit pay dirt. Boy, did I ever. And then I found, there's UFO databases like MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, or NUFORC, National UFO Reporting Center. Started to get a lot there. Really, it was these newspapers, because these are cases which generally only make the local paper. They're rarely national news. But boy, do they make the local paper. And it was just so poignant and touching to hear this testimony from little kids. And so many of them. I mean, some of these actually brought me, to the edge of tears, or 2 tears. Hearing the testimony of these such sweet, innocent children who some weren't believed at first by adults, but would get confirmation when outside witnesses would be like, "Oh yeah, I saw it too." Uh, so it was, a journey to find as many as I did. And since the book came out, I've got a. I'm gonna have to put out a sequel because I've got twice as many reports now. 100 is a lot, and that's enough to provide a huge, statistical sample where you can get an accurate analysis of reports.
I realize that the Zimbabwe case is the most famous. Is there one that would be considered the most legitimate or believable?
I would say the aerial one is undeniable, the Melbourne case, Broadhaven, but there's so many, Jeff. There's so many. I don't think even UFO researchers have any idea. I mean, there's one pretty much exactly like the aerial elementary school in Colombia, I believe it is, which was brought to my attention by Ray Hernandez, who spoke with one of the teachers there. So the vast majority of these are not reported, but they are very well documented, some of these.
Why aren't they being reported?
The cover-up is very effective. I will tell you that the Melbourne case, which had an enormous number of witnesses, the military showed up immediately afterwards and took students alone into separate offices and threatened them, not with their parents, alone. And basically the principal held a meeting and said, if you think you saw a UFO, it was not a UFO. You are not to talk about this. And it was effectively covered up until Dr. James McDonald went to Australia and started tracking it down and interviewing witnesses. And people are, there's, I think Shane Ryan is his name, is still uncovering new information on this case. I'm begging him to write a book on this because he's got a lot of information on this case. And when the Crestview Opalaka case happened, the military showed up when the UFOs were still there, shut the school down. Anyone who rode their bike to school or walked to school was told to leave immediately, and saw the UFOs still hovering there. This one rests on the testimony of a half dozen, 10, 20 witnesses, whereas the Westall case, there is hundreds of witnesses who are still talking. So they have varying degrees of, authenticity, I guess, or eyewitnesses. But to me, it's the huge number of cases that really lends the credence to this particular aspect of UFO encounters. And here is something I found super interesting. When the Hillsdale College incident happened in March of 1966, this one did get national headlines. This is what sparked Representative Ford and Jalen Hynek called it swamp gas, and Ford heard about this and called for a congressional hearing. It had repercussions in this field that affected all of us. But when it occurred, Jim and Cora Lorenzen, my heroes, true pioneers in this field, said, well, isn't this case interesting? We have several schoolyard cases. We think this is intentional. We think the ETs are preparing us for open official contact. We think this is going to happen again. They were right, because two weeks later, the most famous schoolyard incident in Australia happened, the Melbourne case. But in addition to this, Raymond Fowler, another one of my heroes, very thorough, very objective investigator, best known for perhaps the Betty Andreasen case, but really a Massachusetts-based researcher. He said, this case is super interesting, meaning the Hillsdale College case. He said, because I've investigated 15 cases this year, mind you, this is March, this year, that I consider unexplained, and 8 of them, that's over half, took place at schoolyards. So already this was on the map for some researchers. So I don't know how this has slipped under the radar for as long as it has, but it's undeniably a pattern of UFO contact.
I'm going to switch gears with you here, Preston. Have you been following this orb that's been captured in Brazil? And if so, what do you make of it?
Yeah, the Bugosphere or Bugosphere.
Mm-hmm.
I am not a believer. I am not convinced that this is credible for a number of reasons. The designs on the object, I've never heard of anything quite like this. Uh, I'm following the story. We'll see. I can't really give an educated opinion on it until I talk to firsthand witnesses. I'm only in this position that pretty much all of us are and trying to get information on this case. But it is reminiscent of a case that I do find very credible, which is the Betz sphere, B-E-T-Z, where a family found a metallic object sphere very much like that, no markings on it, but was shown to have really strange properties and was studied by scientists. And there is no evidence of that being a hoax. There's some videos out there on that case, super fascinating. I find that one far more compelling. But I'm watching the Bugosphere case to see what comes of it. But at this point, I'm skeptical of what I'm hearing. As an investigator, I kind of have to be that way. And until it's fully vetted and studied, we'll see what comes of it. But right now, I'm not on the fence so much. I'm on the other side of the fence. I'm like, I don't think so. But again, I haven't studied it firsthand, so I'm not really authorized to give a super educated opinion on it.
Can you take us through like how one of your investigations would play out? Like a person would call in or submit a report, and then you would analyze it, and then what would make you decide, okay, this is enough for me to actually go out and interview witnesses?
Yeah. Well, there's two kinds of investigations. I'll just put it this way, because a case that happened in 1950, say, is very hard for me to track down a witness firsthand. But what I can do, especially these days, because we have the internet and I've got access to a large database, is I can get corroboration in terms of, were there any other encounters going on at that time? How many witnesses were interviewed? Who was the investigator for a case? And if it's someone who's, a legit, well-respected investigator, I'm very pleased. And I try to get, there was a case in Sacred Heart Elementary School in Moline, Illinois. And there was a police officer on the playground when this UFO showed up. This is a Catholic school. There were nuns on the playground who saw it as well. A bunch of kids. And I think the police officer's name was Frank Moreno. Or no, maybe that wasn't it. I forget his name. At any rate, he allegedly filmed it. And I thought, wow, I got to get my hands on this film. And it took me forever, but I found it. And by today's standards, it's not a great piece of footage, but given his testimony, the kid's testimony, because researchers did converge on this case, so there's quite a bit of information. And when you can get, a number of people's testimonies and other sightings in or around that area, I think it lends a lot of credence to a case. It's much more rare to track down a case firsthand. I did there a very small portion. It was 5% perhaps people I was able to talk to firsthand. So in that regard, it was frustrating, certainly. I did talk to researchers and track down people who may have been involved in an investigation. And occasionally, yeah, I found a few people who were at schoolyards when it happened. I tracked down Malcolm Robinson, for example, and asked him about it. And, it's always wonderful when you can talk to the witness firsthand, because then you can kind of do the whole cross-examination, I guess you might say. But I said this earlier, it's the huge number of cases that really provides the best evidence that this is going on.
With so much information being posted online, especially now with AI and CGI, how do you sort out what's real and what's not?
Yeah, well, these days it is an absolute mess. I honestly don't pay a whole lot of attention to video and photographic evidence unless a person is willing to step forward with eyewitness testimony, affidavit, talk about it firsthand. I don't want to see a clip of something where the UFO is already there and that's it. You get 10, 15 seconds because the CGI and AI and Photoshop is very advanced for even a amateur user. And it's just, it may be legit, but how would I know? If I can't talk to the witness, to me, it's not only useless, it's in some ways worse than useless. It can be damaging, is what I'm trying to say, because it may go viral. People are like, look at this, and starts spreading out all over the internet. I found a case like that where everyone was calling it a UFO. Because I'm doing information research on USOs as well. And so I tracked it down to its source. And it was a lady who took a picture, and it turned out to be a helicopter. She said so in her post. Nevertheless, this is widely disseminated as a genuine UFO sending down a beam of light. So I try to track down the source, and that's probably the best tool I can get is really trying to find out where this information is coming from. And when it's posted anonymously on the internet, forget about it. I'm not interested because that's why I like the older photographic cases, well before there was Photoshop, that have already been publicized. And we know that these photographs haven't been altered because you can go back to, press clippings from the 50s and 60s, say, and see these photographs yourself.
What do you think about the Billy Meyer case?
I would love to talk to him. I think it's controversial. There's no doubt some of those photographs are hoax. No doubt. It's been proven pretty much. However, I have all the books on this case, and let me tell you, there's like 20 of them. Gary Kinder wrote the book Light Years. He went there. He was convinced. And I've talked to other researchers who have been there, talked to him. I think he's a legitimate contactee. I do, because he was able to put forth an enormous amount of information and actual hard data, hard evidence. He submitted a metal fragment to Marcel Vogel, a scientist, who had done some really advanced work with quartz, and was a legit scientist who studied this metal fragment, and it had many unusual properties that they couldn't quite explain how it was. It had elements we find here on Earth, but elements are universal. Just because something has perhaps titanium or what have you, doesn't necessarily mean it's not from Earth. But he has landing traces as well, some really extraordinary landing trace photographs that have been studied. He's got audio recordings. He took some films, which if you can dig them up, you can see that it's a blue sky and very slowly these craft come in. It would be very, very hard to fake. There are some special effects guys who have analyzed this and said, well, we could do it, but it would cost an enormous amount of money, and we couldn't have done it at the time that these were taken. So I do think it's legit. He's been, there have been 50 people in his presence when UFOs have shown up. That's a lot of people. And there's many, many accounts of this, not just one or two, but dozens. So he's literally got hundreds of corroborating witnesses. But the problem is he put out some photographs, one showing Semyazi, one of his main contacts, which turned out to be a game show host. And another which, there's several photographs which are not legit. So I don't know why this happens. This happens in a number of cases where there's a genuine contactee, and the next thing you know, they're fabricating evidence.
Yeah, that's
Perhaps
strange.
to remain relevant or something. Why would you do that? It destroys your case. This case divided the UFO community. Most people won't even touch it. But I'm reluctant to endorse it because of that. But, I'm just giving you my opinion here. I think it's legit, but I would only go so far with that.
Are you aware of the book by Spencer called Alien Interview about the Roswell nurse?
Yeah.
Do you think that that's true, that we live on a prison planet?
No, no, I don't think it's true. I do not hear this from any other contactees. I will tell you, I talked to him firsthand for an hour or two. I read the book. I have to tell you, it's a good book. For as terms of a readability and intrigue, it's actually really readable. And it has a big bang ending. It's like, wow, this was a good book. Dr. Stanton Friedman, the original Roswell researcher, because it's not true. And he admitted it's false. And apparently he did. And he didn't destroy all the evidence that he said he got from this nurse, Matilda McElroy. And I'm like, what? Why would you? That makes zero sense to me. And a lot of it kind of matches up with some other information that's already out there. And as far as I know, he admitted ultimately that it was a work of fiction, but there's not a single Roswell researcher, as far as I know. Like Donald Schmidt, I asked him about it. He's a really good researcher. I've talked to him. He's like, no, not true. But yeah, it was a good book. I will give it that.
Where are you at with disclosure? And do you think that it's really up to the ETs to make it happen?
Well, I'm glad you asked that because there was a contactee, Donald Shallcross from, I think, West Virginia, who had a UFO land near him, and the ET came out and he asked him, why don't you disclose? Why don't you just land? Why don't you show yourselves to everybody? And their answer made me laugh, made me chuckle. They said, we already have. I thought, you know what? That's true. That's exactly what these schoolyard UFO encounters are. I wrote a book on, like I said, drive-in theaters. I got 100 cases of those. UFOs coming down right over a drive-in theater, hovering right above the screen or right to the side, releasing smaller craft, flashing their lights, very low level, very long lasting, and off they go. 100 people minimum in each of these incidents. So that is disclosure right there. These waves of sightings, whether it's Withville, Virginia, or Gulf Breeze, or Hudson Valley, or Phoenix, or Belgium, or the French wave of 1954, look into that, October, November, left that country absolutely convinced it was a disclosure event. The ETs have done their part, is what I'm trying to say. We have now a worldwide database of literally millions of documented sightings, landings, humanoids, onboard experiences. So the information is there. I mean, we had the Capitol flyover for Pete's sakes. What if that's not a display? What is? They probably would have landed on the White House lawn if we didn't react so hostily. So disclosure on the ET's part has been done. Like I said, they're not going to hover over New York or in a way that's going to cause a portion of the population to demonify them and a portion to deify them. Run for the hills and worship them, or run for the valleys and the caves and get their guns. I think they know better than that. That's not their goal, to cause unrest or disruption. So when it comes to the government, and this is a tricky thing because I'm not sure the mainstream government is responsible for the cover-up. And I'm not sure they're so effective at disclosure either, because we're looking at a very carefully orchestrated, brutal, and disingenuous, corrupt cover-up that is very well funded and has been going on for some 80 years now. As far as I can tell, the folks behind the cover-up are the intelligence agencies, three-letter agencies in the United States and other countries. It's worldwide. The highest level of the military, certainly, the Army, Air Force, and Navy, are complicit with this. The Pentagon, certainly, but not so much presidents. Some senators are clearly in the loop. There's bad actors here, but mainstream government, for the most part, no. And for that matter, we have the FOIA, Freedom of Information Act. This is useless in trying to get information out of private organizations. And this has been largely, or at least to some extent, privatized. So we have organizations or corporations like Boeing, perhaps, or Lockheed, who are also complicit. So it's become a very difficult situation to try to extricate the truth from. We've got an enormous black budget that is now causing all kinds of controversy. We've all heard about the $1,000 hammer that the Pentagon has, spent money on. This is what's going on here. This money is being funneled towards this subject, which is taken very seriously at high levels of government. So their, affirmation or whatever you want, their declaration that all encounters can be explained as hoaxes, hallucinations, misperceptions, and mental illness is disingenuous. They 100% know what's going on. They have the hardware from Roswell and other crashes. They have the bodies. And here they are saying, oh, there's nothing to it, and showing us little films of lights in the sky, blurry ones, by the way, and giving tidbits from whistleblowers who are clearly carefully sanctioned or just plain old bad actors, government stooges, if you will, who are putting forth a narrative that I think is probably fabricated, constructed out of pure fiction. So I'm not a fan, as you can tell, of how disclosure is going right now. To me, the only good thing that's really come out of all these recent congressional hearings and official discussion is it's bringing an enormous amount of attention to this subject. It's bringing a legitimacy that it's never enjoyed before, because they've now painted themselves into a corner. They have become irrelevant and not credible, and this is forcing their hand. If they don't disclose, they become not credible, not the go-to people to get information. And they shouldn't be, unless and until they're willing to admit to Malmstrom, 1967, Capitol flyover, 1952, any number of incidents, Roswell, 1947. I don't think we should go to them for information. Until and unless they're willing to tell the truth and come clean, at least to some degree, why would I listen to you? I don't think we need to go to them for the truth. We need to go to the contactees. This is how I feel about it. I don't think we're ever going to get full truth and transparency. And to me, that's disclosure. Show us the craft, show us the bodies, or shut up and get out.
Do you think that we have a secret space force that is super advanced and even to the level of Star Trek already?
I'm not sure I would call it that, but yes, I do. I think that pretty much everything people are seeing flying around right now would fall under that category. That we have reverse engineered craft, that we have found essentially anti-gravity. There's a lot of whistleblowers who I think are legit. I do think Bob Lazar is for real. And I've got reasons for thinking that, because I've talked to contactees. I mean, there was a guy in Utah, Spanish Forks, Utah, who had an encounter. When he saw Bob Lazar come out with his drawings, he almost fell over. He's like, that's exactly the craft I was on. Dolly Safran, one of my favorite contactees, is absolutely convinced Lazar is telling the truth, because he's saying stuff that you'd have to be, in the loop to know about. She was told, in essence, that yes, he is the real deal. So my point is, yes, there are enough whistleblowers out there who have told the truth about us having technology to reverse engineer these craft. We are flying them around. They can zip around at 1,000 miles plus miles per hour and turn at right angles and do things that we would consider to be absolutely ET. Are they flying to other planets? I doubt it. I don't know that we have that level of technology, but I think that, yes, there's a whole faction out there. Don't know that this is legitimized in terms of, mainstream military. I think it's part of the secret government, the alt government, and is very carefully covered up. So I don't know how this is ever going to become part of public knowledge in a way that we can officially verify it. I don't expect the US government will ever be on the front lines of disclosure. I would be much more inclined to think it would be Mexico or Chile or Brazil, or I don't know. I don't think it's going to be one of the major superpowers. We'll see. I do think it will happen, for one reason only, because it's the truth. You can't hide the sky. I've said this for years. Sooner or later, truth is going to come out. You can distort it, you can hide it, you can lie about it, you can never destroy it. Truth is indestructible. So sooner or later, it's got to come out. I think it's inevitable.
Do you think that the ETs are still here or they've left?
Well, this is a great question because Dolly Saffron told me some 2 years ago that they left. And that raised my eyebrows, certainly, because I am in touch with quite a few contactees who have regular contact. And a number of them, I called them up or they called me and like, no, haven't had contact in 2-3 years. What's going on? And so I've gotten some confirmation of that. I've had a few who like, well, I'm still in telepathic contact. Yes. And one guy from England's like, well, I did see a little gray. But this could be what we would call remote viewing. They can appear to a person and look physical. What I'm not getting are onboard encounters. So if you look at some of the databases of like NUFORC or MUFON, you'll see a severe drop in cases of direct contact. Lots of cases of orbs and lights and stuff that's somewhat ambiguous. But even that, the number has dropped radically. There was a huge spike in 2020 to 2022, and then dropped. So I'm inclined to think that these contactees who are talking to me, like Dolly Saffron, are correct.
Why did they leave? And where did they go?
That's the million-dollar question. Well, from what the contactees are telling me, it's because our magnetic fields have become unstable. So I started digging into the science of this. And that's true. There was the Carrington event in 1859, I think it was, which at that time, our magnetic fields were still pretty much in full force. But I encourage everyone to do their own research on this because, don't believe me. It's really essential everyone vets this for themselves. But from what I can tell, yeah, our magnetic fields have weakened to about 60% or less. And this is why the ETs have left. And this is why there's so many accounts of them crashing. People always ask, if they're so advanced, how come they're crashing? And my answer has always been, well, stuff happens. Nobody's perfect. But it makes a lot more sense if you think about it, because these craft, and this comes from many contactees, operate by harnessing our magnetic gravitational field lines. And if they're wildly unstable, it makes perfectly sense because it can suddenly drop and then boom, that craft is going down. So it's not just Roswell. There's quite a few cases of UFO crashes. So I think that's why they left. As to where they've gone, I've only got a little bit of information on this in terms of firsthand contactees, but to other galaxies. This is really interesting. I wish there was more people studying this subject because I'm just one guy. I'm a bookkeeper. Is basically my education. I do have a science background, but it's pretty general. I learned what I could in college, but I'm following this as closely as I can and trying to educate myself on all these subjects. And I think that is exactly what's going on. So many contactees have gotten the message that at some point we will be picked up. If and when there is a global existential crisis, so many contactees have gotten this message of the skies filling with craft, people being scooped up right before the pole tilts or global tilt or a micronova, or most contactees will just see they're being shown pictures of disasters. So some have a better, broader understanding of it than others, certainly. But from the beginning, ETs have been warning about this over and over again. Grays, human-looking, praying mantis, little blue guys, tall whites, I don't care. They all have the same exact message, all of them.
Are you aware if this magnetic instability is cyclical or not? And if so, you have any idea when it will stabilize again?
My understanding, it is cyclical, that this is something that happens. Well, there's, different cycles here, a 6,000 year and 12,000 year. And we're at the point now where so much debris has gathered over the sun that every 12,000 years or so, it blows up in micronovas. And essentially, this is what, the collapse of the magnetic fields is due to, I'm getting a lot of this information from contactees. It's hard for me to how would I say, describe it in terms that, they have a better understanding of it. But from what I understand, there's going to be a coronal mass ejection of such a degree that it's going to knock down our grid. And this is going to cause the whole electrical system worldwide to fail. And once that happens, our magnetic fields will stabilize to a degree where the ETs can come back. Because at that point, we are facing a global tilt on the Earth's axis and a possible micronova. And from what Dolly Saffron is telling me and a few others, just a few, but they're telling me the same thing, is that it could happen. It's imminent. I'm of the mind that major geological events like volcanic eruptions and earthquakes and tornadoes and hurricanes are hard to predict. You can see it when it's coming, but in terms of when it's going to happen, it's very hard to predict. But it's my understanding it could happen tomorrow, today, to within a year or two. I'm very careful about this because predictions are tricky things. And people have been predicting the end of the world since the beginning of the world. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I live each day in joy and truth and try to increase my knowledge and figure out what's going on here and take courage and joy in the fact that we're immortal beings. As you know from having interviewed so many people who've had near-death experiences, I take great comfort in that. Having had a lot of out-of-body experiences myself. So ultimately, I think it's good news. I know people are like, what are you talking about? An existential crisis? How is this good news? It is because we're living in a world that's not sustainable. It's horrific what's happening to a lot of people on this planet for a millennia. The mass genocides and the poisoning of our food and water. And, this is not the way people are supposed to be living. So ultimately, I think we're better off starting over. I don't mean to be brutal, because there's life after death. We're all going to be fine no matter what happens. Death is a very easy transition compared to birth, I think. So I'm not too worried about things. I'm actually pretty eager to see how this all rolls out. But from what I understand, we all chose to come here. So on some level, we all know this. It's just trying to educate people and bring it to their awareness and get them to remember the fact that we're connected to the all.
Do you think that the governments of the world know something like this magnetic instability is going on, and that's why there are so many underground tunnels and maybe even cities being built or have been built?
Absolutely. The simple answer would be a big yes. You have to wonder, if you look into this. Check out the book by Richard Sauder, Sauder, Underground Bases, I think it's called. And it's shocking when you realize just pretty much every military base goes underground. There's, I think it's Switzerland has massive underground area for their, whole population. So there are some who are really prepared for major catastrophes. I'm not sure how effective it's going to be against a massive CME that basically, can reach miles deep and wipe out everything. But it's certainly better than just sitting there and waiting for, stuff to happen. We can all prepare to a certain degree, I think. But yeah, absolutely. I think our military knows way, way more. They know exactly what's going on. They know about the ET presence. They know about the millions. It's not thousands or hundreds of thousands. It's millions of people being taken on board. They know far more than the average UFO researcher or even contactee knows. They have spent, and this is number one subject for them. They have spent an enormous amount of time, money, effort, and energy to understand this and study this. I think they know pretty much everything that's going on. Yeah,
Your latest book, I believe, is titled Not From Here, Volume 5. Is that right?
that's correct. Yeah.
So you have 5 books about this subject. I mean, I guess basically it's about ETs that are not from here, or what?
Yeah. Well, I've written 32, 32 books. I'm losing count. Uh, I'm currently, and most of them do cover the subject of UFOs, but I've branched off into the paranormal to a degree with, human levitation and Bigfoot, ghosts, out of body experiences connected to some degree. The Not From Here series is all about UFOs. And in that multi-volume series, I'm studying cases that are a little bit more controversial, uh, avenues that really haven't been fully explored or have been ignored, frankly. I was going to do a chapter in one of those books on schoolyard encounters, but found too many, and that became its own book. Same with the drive-in movie theaters. But yeah, I'm covering different aspects, and so each of those books has 10 chapters on a different sort of subcategory of UFO contact, such as UFOs over graveyards. That's a thing. They're hovering over graveyards, landing, humanoids are being seen. Same with prisons. UFOs are very interested in technology. UFO landings at airports. You'd be surprised how much activity airports get. UFOs over hydroelectric dams. That's another chapter. So each of one of these, explores a subcategory of this subject. One's all about astronomers who have seen UFOs. Another is cases involving massive super waves. Generally, when someone sees a UFO, it's 1, 2, 5, 10, 20 even. There's a handful, 10, 20 cases where people have seen 200, 300 objects in the sky. And that's not well known. So I did a whole study on that for one chapter. UFOs over mines, that's another chapter that was so eye-opening. Who knew that they're landing in, Arizona's copper mines, or the diamond mines in Africa, or gold mines, silver mines, iron mines. There's a case in Karnes City, Texas, where they landed a uranium mine and deactivated the uranium. I found that case particularly
Wow,
interesting.
that's not far from me, too. I didn't even know there was a uranium mine down there.
Yeah, Karnes City,
Hmm.
Karnes. An amazing case.
Well, if people want to find out about all your books, do they go to Amazon or to a website?
Either. I do have a website. It's my name, so it's pretty easy to remember or look up. The actual address is prestondennett.weebly.com. But if you punch in my name, it should eventually take you there. You can get them on Amazon, certainly, Barnes and Noble, bookstores. I do have excerpts on my website, so you can kind of dig in and go down the rabbit hole because I've got a huge amount of information on my website. It'll keep you busy for a while. I have a YouTube channel as well. I'm on the various social media platforms. Pretty easy to find, actually.
Well, what are you working on next?
Always got irons in the fire. My current project is the sequel to probably my favorite contactee story ever, Dolly Saffron. I wrote a book called Symmetry, A True UFO Adventure, which tells her lifelong contacts with ETs. But we only skim the surface. She's the most aware and experienced contactee I'm aware of. Not only interviewed, but that I've read. So her story is really extensive. We're doing a sequel for that right now. And I'm working on another of my own out-of-body experiences. It's the only autobiographical book I've read. I got very good at OBEs when I was a young man, so I'm working on a sequel to that. I'm working on another Not From Here series. I thought I was done with that, but I started finding some really interesting patterns, and I love exploring that. So another one on the supernatural because it's all connected, and I like to dip into that every now and then. Another one, I love writing about people who have had direct contact. That's where the answers are. That's the cutting edge of UFO research. That and crash retrievals, I think. So that's another thing I'm working on.
Would you say that Dolly is the best case that you've ever seen? I mean, even better than Travis Walton or Whitley Strieber?
100%. And I'll tell you why. Travis Walton's case was a one-off, and it was essentially 15 minutes. He has come forward and said he has had some other minor incidents, possibly a missing time incident. Whitley Strieber has had an enormous amount of contact. I love his books. I adore the man. He popularized this subject. His work in this field can't be underestimated. But he also has a lot of missing time incidents. Much of his stuff was recovered under hypnosis. And he'll be the first to tell you it scares him. You know, if you read Communion, it's quite a scary story. Dolly has not used hypnosis. She doesn't need it. She has no fear. And I've interviewed so many people, and almost all of them look at their experiences through the lens of fear or recalled through hypnosis. I've you know, of the 200-300 people I've formerly interviewed, and it's been a lot more than that. It's close to 1,000 in terms of, you know, talking to people, but formally interviewed, I would say 5 of them, 4 or 5 have what I would call full conscious contact. I absolutely remember, aren't having missing time anymore. But they don't have the degree of contact Dolly has. She was taken 2 times a week on the average since age 14, all up to her mid-60s. So that's a lot. So yeah, she's, you know, Betty Andreasen is a case that's very, very extensive. But even much of hers was recalled through hypnosis. There's some other contactees out there who are incredible, but I can't think of anyone quite like Dolly. Or I know there's some out there, you know, in various countries whose books aren't translated into English yet. Wendell Stevens has written a series of 10 or 20 books outlining some contactees who had that same kind of contact. But most of these people aren't going public. And you can see why, because this society is really brutal, and particularly even in this field, skeptics and naysayers and debunkers. And if the more evidence you have, the harder they will attack you. So it's very risky for people to come forward. Even within their own family, they can have a hard time. So kudos to anyone who has the courage to come forward. Yeah, Dolly's case is more extensive than any I've researched or read about.
Well, Preston, before we finish up, can you give us one more positive message?
You know, being alive is an absolute gift. If we can recognize just that alone, that we live in this universe and we are a part of it. In fact, we're an integral part of it. You can't separate yourself from the universe. And having that gift, being a part of the universe, means we have all the power of the universe within us. People have no idea of their own power. And I love that. Because if you look into this subject of, you know, just what it means to be human, we do have the ability to levitate, teleport, clairvoyance, mediumship, invisibility, you name it. These so-called superpowers are not supernatural. They are natural. This is something we should all be able to do. So this is such a wonderful thing. And I think we're all on the pathway towards waking up to being a fully realized, fully enlightened human being. We're all on the pathway towards that. So I think that's such good news. Whenever I, you know, get a little bit down with all the negativity that's surrounding us these days, I just remind myself, gosh, what a great gift it is to be alive. And I would encourage everyone to just meditate a little bit, you know, leave fear behind. It doesn't serve that much purpose. And walk in love and truth. This is the main message you hear from near-death experiences. You know, knowledge and love is what we bring with us to the other side. So carry that with you. Allow love and truth to guide your actions. And I think we'll all be so much better off. I'm so happy to be a part of this universe. I can't tell you. It's just a joy.
Preston, thanks for your message, and thank you for being my guest again.
True pleasure. Thank you. A pleasure and an honor.
Well, the honor's all mine. Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.